October 3rd, 1942, Upper Silesia, occupied Poland, 04:17 a.m. A cold mist clung to the rail yard like a second skin. Diesel fumes drifted low, mixing with the metallic scent of wet iron and coal dust. Floodlights cast long, sharp shadows across rows of freight cars waiting in the dark, some filled with ammunition, some with fuel, others with soldiers sleeping upright with rifles between their knees. This was Kuznia rail yard, one of the busiest supply hubs feeding Hitler's Eastern Front. Here trains groaned awake before dawn, their wheels shrieking as if protesting the war they were forced to serve. Among the silhouettes moving through the fog was Piotr Lewandowski, a thin, tired Polish railway worker, wearing the white armband that marked him as a forced laborer. His breath came in clouds, his boots were cracked, his hands were chapped and scarred from weeks of hauling coupling chains, checking brake lines, and hammering wheel locks loose with a rusted iron mallet. A German guard barked an order, and Piotr lifted a crate of chalk sticks from a supply cart, simple white chalk meant for maintenance work on train undercarriages, harmless, forgettable, unless you used it the way Piotr did. He moved between freight cars as the shift whistle screamed through the rail yard. The workers scurried, the guards shouted, and locomotives belched steam thick enough to hide a man for seconds at a time, and that was all Piotr needed. He crouched by the first wagon on track 12, a tanker car bound for Army Group South, and pressed the chalk against the steel rim of its wheel. One line. Then the next wagon. Another mark. Then another. And another. And another. Every chalk stroke had meaning. A single line meant fuel. A triangle meant munitions. Two parallel lines meant troop transport. A circle, the rarest, meant armored divisions. All harmless markings easily mistaken for maintenance slashes. But to the Polish resistance, they were coordinates, and to the Allies, they were lifelines. A German night shift corporal glanced over. "You missed one," he snapped. Piotr nodded submissively. "Yes, sir." He bent down, added another innocent white streak. The corporal walked on. Piotr allowed himself one shaky breath. He didn't know exactly who at the top received the intelligence he gathered, but he knew how it worked. Every night, a resistance courier returned to the switching station and jotted the order of trains, the chalk codes, the departure times. Messages were passed hand to hand, farm to factory, village to village, until they reached a wireless operator hiding in the ruins of Warsaw. From there, the coded transmissions flew across Europe like sparks in the dark, to London, to RAF Bomber Command, to Allied planners who were desperate for one thing Germany guarded above all else: predictability. When did troop trains leave? When did fuel convoys move? Where would the next armored push come from? Piotr listened to gossip among the guards, memorizing destinations. He memorized the roster board. He memorized every pattern in the movement of trains, which tracks rattled louder, which locomotives needed repairs, which engineer complained about which cargo. Some called him the Ghost, because he drifted through the rail yard silently, unnoticed, a thin man with tired eyes and a habit of staring at train wheels as if they were maps. He was doing exactly that. The chalk marks were laughable to the Germans, who assumed forced laborers were too beaten, too scared, too broken to resist. But Piotr wasn't broken. He had lost family in the Warsaw roundups. He had seen villages burned for rumors. He had watched train after train disappear eastward and never return. Every chalk line he drew was revenge, quiet, invisible revenge that no German would ever attribute to him.
As the sky brightened into a pale Polish dawn, locomotives roared alive one by one. The rails vibrated, workers scattered. The first train of the day began to move, wheels turning, the white chalk lines spinning like the second hand of a clock. Piotr stood still for a moment, coat damp with mist, heart pounding. He whispered to himself, "London will see you." And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, in a wooden hut filled with radios and maps, someone would see.
The network built from shadows. October 3rd, 1942, 22:11 p.m., 47 kilometers west of Kuznia railyard. The wind howled through the ruined windows of an abandoned farmhouse. A single candle burned on a kitchen table scarred with knife cuts and bullet holes. The wallpaper peeled. The floor creaked. Yet the room was alive, filled with tense whispers and the scrape of pencil on paper. 3 members of the Polish resistance huddled around the doorway, listening, while Eva Makowska, a schoolteacher by day and courier by night, transcribed the day's intelligence. On the table lay a rough sketch. Track 12. Mark equals single line. Fuel convoy. Departure 4:32. Engine 9124. Destination Rosen. Army Group South. She underlined it twice. Fuel was gold. Fuel meant movement. Piotr stood near the wall, arms crossed, still shivering from a day spent in the railyard fog. Dirt streaked his face. Chalk dust lined his fingernails. Eva glanced up. "You're certain about these times?" "If I wasn't, I'd be dead," Piotr answered quietly. The others exchanged looks. They all knew the risk. German patrols raided farmhouses almost every night. Anyone caught with railway information would be executed on the spot. No trial, no prison, just a shallow grave outside town. But the intelligence was too valuable. In the summer of 1942, German forces were tightening their grip on the Eastern Front. Panzer divisions relied on precise, uninterrupted train schedules. If even one major convoy was hit at the right time, entire offensives could stall. This was the kind of leverage only someone like Piotr could provide, someone inside the machine. Eva folded the paper into a clay canister no larger than her fist. Inside, a microfilm strip rested among rolled messages. With practiced motions, she sealed it with a smear of mud and ash, making it look like a random piece of broken pottery. She slid it into a sack of potatoes by the door. "Tomorrow," she said, "a woman from the next village will buy these. She'll hand the wrong bag to the right man. He'll carry it to the woods near the old mill. They'll pass it further. By the next dawn, our message will be in Warsaw." Piotr nodded. "And London?" Eva smiled faintly. "If Warsaw breathes, London hears." October 5th, 1942. Warsaw. Resistance radio station, Orzel. Deep beneath a collapsed apartment block, hidden behind brick and rubble, a radio operator named Yannick hunches over a British-made wireless set. The room throbbed with static. Sweat trickled down his neck despite the cold. If the Germans triangulated the signal, they would melt the floor above with explosives. On the table beside him lay the latest courier dispatch, including Piotr's coded notes. He tapped the message into encrypted form. F-line 9134, 432, south, heavy load. His fingers flew over the key. Dots, dashes, silent war. Within minutes, the signal leapt across Europe, caught by a listening post in Malta, relayed through Gibraltar, and then carried by cable into a dimly lit room inside Bletchley Park. October 5th, 1942. Bletchley Park, Hut 3. A young WAF operator handed the decoded strip to Flight Lieutenant Andrew Merton, an intelligence analyst with dark circles under his eyes and cigarette ash on his uniform. "Another Polish supply report, sir." He scanned it, His brow lifted. Fuel convoy. Confirmed. Same line as last week's target. He snapped his fingers toward the map table. Mark it. A pin dropped into a wooden map of Europe. Over its strings connected data points, departures, destinations, timings, all matching Piotr's chalk marks. He turned to his assistant. Notify Bomber Command. Tonight. October 6th, 2:02 a.m., over northern Poland. Clouds swallowed the moon as British Handley Page Halleck's bombers rumbled through the darkness. Their engines vibrated the air. Their bomb bay doors groaned open. The lead pilot, Squadron Leader Robert Kingsley, received final directions from the navigator. Fuel convoy confirmed. Track 12. Arrival window. 4:30 to 5:00 a.m. Kingsley nodded. They won't see dawn. Below them, a German fuel train rushed through a valley, its wheels flashing white every time Piotr's chalk marks spun into the light. 20 miles away, Piotr lay awake on his cot in the railyard barracks. He didn't know when the Allies would strike. He never did. But he stared at the ceiling and mouthed the same prayer he always whispered. Let the chalk do its work. Moments later, the night lit up. A roar rolled across the horizon. The windows shook. A fireball climbed toward the sky. The fuel convoy, the one marked by Piotr's stupid chalk lines, erupted into an inferno that turned night into sunrise. Piotr sat upright, breath caught in his throat. He knew. He knew they had seen his marks. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a thin, exhausted smile.
The German hunt began. October 6th, 1942. Kuzmia Railyard. 05:41 a.m. The smoke reached the railyard before the news did. A thick, oily column rising on the horizon, glowing orange at its base. Workers stopped mid-step. Guards shaded their eyes. Even locomotives seemed to hiss quieter as the wind carried the unmistakable scent of burning fuel. By sunrise, the truth arrived on the back of a motorcycle courier. A major fuel convoy. Destroyed. No survivors. Tracks melted. Cargo lost. A disaster the Wehrmacht could not afford. Shouting erupted across the railyard. The Germans stormed through the work crews like wolves among sheep. Barked orders echoed off steel freight cars. Check every yard worker. Interrogate maintenance crews. No one leaves until we find the culprit. Piotr kept his head low, broom in hand, sweeping coal dust in slow circles, the picture of a submissive laborer. But inside, his pulse hammered against his ribs. He knew what the Germans didn't. The convoy wasn't sabotaged locally. It wasn't bombs on tracks or hidden charges. It was information. Just chalk. Just timing. Just him. He didn't need to plant explosives. He pointed with a line, and the Allies pulled the trigger. A German foreman approached, boots striking the gravel with deadly purpose. "You!" he snarled, grabbing Piotr's shoulder. "Where were you last night?" "In the barracks." True, and not true. He'd been there physically, though the chalk he had used hours earlier had traveled far beyond the railyard by then. The foreman squinted. "You worked track 12 yesterday, yes?" Piotr nodded slowly. This was the moment, the thin edge between survival and the firing squad. He forced a tired, irritated huff, the kind any overworked, abused laborer might give. "Yes, sir, as I always do. The brake lines, the couplings, the wheel checks. If there's a problem, it's your equipment, not me." A risky answer, but a desperate one sounded more believable than a timid one.
The foreman glared, then shoved him. "Get back to work." Piotr exhaled silently. October 8, 1942. The German Counterintelligence Office in Krakow. Major Kurt Reinhardt, a man whose face never showed warmth, studied the spread of recent sabotage reports. Something didn't add up. Tracks weren't blown, guards weren't bribed, no one planted explosives. But the Allies kept finding the trains. Every time. Perfect timing, perfect target selection. He circled 4 reports in red. All convoys had originated from the same railyard region. "Someone is watching," he murmured. "Someone with access." He made a note. Begin covert surveillance of yard personnel. Focus on Polish maintenance workers. Piotr's clock was now ticking. October 10th, 1942. The potato road near the village of Saray. Eva, carrying a sack of potatoes on her bicycle, pedaled down a muddy lane lined with frost-tipped grass. Her breath smoked in the morning cold. Hidden inside the potatoes were 3 tiny clay canisters, each containing Piotr's newest reports. Every bump in the road felt like a gunshot. Every leaf rustle felt like a German patrol. Then she saw them, 2 soldiers near the crossroads, rifles slung low. She forced herself to ride smoothly, head down, face blank. One soldier stepped forward. "You, stop." Her heart nearly burst. He pointed at the sack. "That's a heavy load. Trade? My wife will pay good bread." Eva nodded quickly and lifted the sack off the bike. The soldier rummaged through it, pulling out potatoes. Her throat tightened as his hand brushed a clay canister. He squeezed the potato beside it instead. Laughing, he shoved the sack back into her arms and waved her off. Eva pedaled away, legs shaking. One false move, and the entire spy network, including Piotr, would have been erased. October 12, 1942. Bletchley Park, Hut 3. Flight Lieutenant Merton reviewed the latest intercepts. Another convoy scheduled. Another set of chalk-based timing notes. He traced the route with his pencil. "Always accurate," he muttered. "Whoever this Polish asset is, they're brilliant." He pinched the bridge of his nose. There were whispers across the intelligence community that Hitler's 3rd Panzer Army was planning a major winter offensive. If fuel or troop trains could be choked off, if their timing could be disrupted, it could save tens of thousands of Allied and Soviet lives. He tapped the map. "Send to Bomber Command. Priority strike." October 13th, 1942. Kuznia Railyard. Night. Piotr lay awake again on his cot. Outside, boots crunched on gravel. Dogs barked. German officers shouted a midnight roll call. They were checking names, looking for fear, for guilt. Piotr closed his eyes and steadied his breath. He had drawn chalk lines earlier that day, so simple, so stupid-looking, but every mark was a razor pressed to Germany's supply lines. He whispered the same words he did every night before a strike. Let the chalk guide them. He didn't know if the Allies would hit the convoy tonight, but he knew this: Reinhardt was closing in. One more mistake, one wrong mark, one moment too slow, and Piotr would not live to see morning. The night the chalk became a weapon. October 15th, 1942, Kuznia Railyard, 03:14 a.m. A freezing wind swept through the yard as freight cars clanked, hissed, and rumbled into position. Lanterns swung from hooks, steam vented in angry bursts. The rails shivered with the weight of a massive armored convoy being assembled, a priority movement carrying fuel tankers, anti-tank guns, ammunition, and several rail cars housing panzer grenadiers. The cargo was bound for the central corridor of the Eastern Front, a developing German counteroffensive that could crush the exhausted Soviet line near Rej. If it reached its destination, thousands would die. Piotr crouched beneath the tanker wagon, his hands numb against the cold steel. He pretended to check a brake pad while the German guard paced above. When the guard turned, Piotr pressed his chalk, one small, pathetic piece, against the wheel. He drew a simple arc, intersecting a straight slash. A code for fuel and armor, a top target. He moved to the next wagon. Another mark. He repeated the pattern until his chalk was a stub. He stood slowly, rubbing his hands together, and took his position with the maintenance crew. Behind him, the marks began their journey, spinning silently as the wheels rolled forward. Little did Piotr know he was also being watched. October 15, 1942, Railyard Perimeter Fence, 03:28 a.m. Major Kurt Reinhardt peered through binoculars, breath fogging in the air. A searchlight swept across the tracks, illuminating freight cars in stark bursts. He had spent days studying behavior patterns. Most workers moved predictably, sluggish, fearful, resigned. But not this one, not Piotr. Reinhardt noticed how often he paused by wheels, how often he positioned himself near high-value loads. Something was wrong, horribly wrong. He handed the binoculars to his adjutant. "Watch him." "Yes, sir." Reinhardt lit a cigarette, its ember glowing like a red eye in the dark. "We've had too many coincidences if another convoy is destroyed." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. October 15, 1942, Warsaw, underground radio station Orzel, 05:42 a.m. Janek, pale and sleepless, received the latest courier dispatch. He fed the microfilm through the projector. 3 symbols repeated over and over: /arc, /arc, /arc. He recognized them instantly. High-value armored fuel train. Departure 03:45. Destination Vyazma. Expected arrival 08:50. He tapped the key rapidly. Dots and dashes poured from the transmitter like whispered fury. Minutes later, the message reached Bletchley Park. October 15, 1942, RAF Linton on Ouse, 07:03 a.m. Engines roared as de Havilland mosquitoes, the wooden wonders, screamed down the runway. They carried armor-piercing ordnance designed for railway interdiction. Squadron leader Michael Darrington pulled his goggles down. Navigation confirmed. Window open for strike at 08:40. We hit them hard and get out. The sky swallowed the squadron whole. October 15, 1942, Eastern Poland, 08:43 a.m. Piotr's marked convoy steamed across an open stretch of countryside. Pines blurred by. Smoke belched from the engine stack. A distant hum built in the clouds. Then shapes. Fast. Descending. 4 mosquitoes, sunlight flashing off their wings. The escort gunners barely had time to shout. The mosquitoes dove like hawks. Bomb bay doors opened. The world erupted. The first explosion tore through the middle tankers. The second ripped open ammunition cars. The third set the entire train ablaze in a chain reaction of fire, shrapnel, and screaming steel. The armored wagons twisted, flipped, and split. The locomotives derailed and plowed into the earth in a plume of dust and burning oil. It was over in seconds. The offensive that the German High Command had quietly assembled crippled before it started. From a distant bluff, a solitary figure watched the burning wreckage. Major Reinhardt stood perfectly still, cigarette frozen in his fingers. He didn't speak for nearly a minute. Finally, he muttered, "Someone inside the railyard did this." His adjutant whispered, "Do you think it's sabotage?" Reinhardt shook his head slowly. No, no explosives, no tracks tampered with, no signs of tampering at all. He stared at the burning wagons, stunned. No, someone knew. Someone knew exactly which train to hit. The truth chilled him more than sabotage ever could. Sabotage was visible. Sabotage could be stopped. But invisible intelligence, hidden codes, chalk marks that looked like nothing. How do you stop a ghost? Back in the railyard, 09:31 a.m. Guards blew whistles. Men were lined up and counted. Piotr swallowed hard, trying to look exhausted, frustrated, anything but terrified. His hand still carried faint white dust, the last traces of the chalk that destroyed a German offensive. He brushed them against his trousers. No one noticed. But Reinhardt was coming, and the chalk, for all its power, couldn't erase its creator. Piotr's next move would decide whether he lived long enough to mark another wheel or whether his final chalk line would be the one drawn around his body.
The Chalk Ghost's Last Message. October 16, 1942, Kuznia Railyard, 02:57 a.m. Cold crept across the ground like a living thing. Frost glazed the steel rails. Heavy boots echoed in the dark as German patrols swept the perimeter with lanterns and dogs. The air was tense, suffocating. Something had shifted since the last explosion. Piotr felt it immediately when he stepped out of the barracks. The guards were watching him differently now. Their eyes didn't skim over him, they stuck to him. Major Reinhardt had tightened the net. This time the railyard was silent, too silent. As Piotr passed track 9, a German corporal barked, "You, halt!" His breath froze. But the corporal only kicked a loose coupling rod. "Fix this, now!" Piotr nodded, kneeling down. His heart thundered. The chalk stub in his pocket felt like a glowing coal. He was out of time. If he didn't finish one last message tonight, the entire region's resistance network could collapse. But if he was caught marking one more wheel, he'd be shot on the spot, no question. He inhaled slowly, the way he used to before diving into cold river water as a child. Think, move, survive. 03:12 a.m., track 14. A new train sat idling in the fog, troop transport, machine gun mounts, winter uniforms stacked in crates. Thousands of German soldiers preparing to redeploy east. This was a major movement. This needed to reach London, and it needed to be marked now. A guard tower light swept across the yard. Workers flinched under its glare. Piotr waited for the beam to pass. When the fog thickened again, he moved. He crouched beside the lead wagon. His fingers slid into his pocket. The chalk stub was small enough to hide between two fingers. One quick mark, a burned-in triangle for infantry transport. He stood, walked 2 meters, knelt again. Another mark, a single line with a dot for heavy weapons. He moved with the rhythm of someone fixing brakes, the same motions he always made. Nothing suspicious, nothing detectable. Except this time, Reinhardt was watching. 03:19 a.m., perimeter fence. Through binoculars, Reinhardt's eyes locked onto Piotr. The behavior was subtle, so subtle a casual observer would never notice. But Reinhardt wasn't casual. "That one," he hissed to his adjutant, "he's doing something." "Sir, it looks like brake inspection." Reinhardt shook his head. "No, look at his hands." The adjutant hesitated. He's holding nothing? Exactly, Reinhardt whispered. He's hiding something small. A tool? No, too small. His breath fogged in the cold as he lowered the binoculars. Bring me that man. Quietly. The adjutant nodded. Yes, sir. 03:22 a.m., between tracks 14 and 15. Piotr felt the pressure before he heard the boots. Instinct, or maybe the terrible intuition of a hunted man. He didn't turn, didn't run. Running would confirm everything. He just kept walking. One foot, then the next. The chalk marks were finished. The message was sent. Almost. He still needed the courier to see it. He still needed to leave a clue, a sign. He stopped at the switching board, a wooden stand with hooks for lanterns. His fingers brushed the metal frame. Quietly, casually, he pressed what was left of the chalk into a tiny crevice behind it. His final message, his final act, a beacon for the resistance collector. Boots pounded closer. A hand clamped down on his shoulder. Du kommst mit. The soldier growled. You're coming with us. Piotr looked up at the sky, a faint sliver of moon emerging from the fog. He said nothing. He didn't fight. He didn't break. He had already won. 03:40 a.m. Railyard basement holding cell. Reinhardt entered, coat collar lifted against the cold. He shut the door behind him, leaving the flickering bulb buzzing overhead. Piotr sat on a wooden bench, posture steady. He looked small, fragile, ordinary. Reinhardt studied him like an insect pinned to a board. You've been here for months, working, watching, and every time we lose a convoy, your shift is connected, your tracks, your trains. Piotr didn't reply. Reinhardt leaned closer. How? Still nothing. Sabotage, signaling, hidden tools. Piotr's voice finally broke the silence, barely above a whisper. Just chalk. Reinhardt frowned. What? Piotr lifted his head, eyes calm and steady. Just chalk. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a small smile. Not of triumph, but of peace. Reinhardt stared at him incredulous. Chalk? Chalk had brought down fuel convoys, troop trains, armored divisions. Chalk had redirected Allied bombers with surgical precision. He stepped back, almost laughing. It couldn't be true. It was too stupid, too simple, too brilliant. But before Reinhardt could speak, a thunderous explosion shook the rail yard above. Lights flickered, dust rained from the ceiling. Another strike, another train, another convoy destroyed. All because of a mark made hours ago. Reinhardt realized the truth with a hollow, sinking feeling. The man sitting before him didn't need sabotage tools, didn't need bombs, didn't need guns. He had weaponized the Germans' own logistics system. He had killed with chalk. Hours later, as Piotr was transported away under guard, resistance couriers recovered his final hidden chalk stub and the switching board marking. By evening, the intelligence reached Warsaw. By midnight, it reached London. And by dawn, another German supply artery burned. Piotr never witnessed the full impact of what he started, but historians would later write. He rewrote Hitler's supply lines with chalk the way a general rewrites a map with ink. The man the Germans called a useless laborer became one of the most devastating intelligence assets of the war. A ghost who never fired a bullet, but helped bring an army to its knees.